So let's look at human factor science and how that influences our ability to make connections. Human factor science is a blend of several disciplines, including cognitive psychology, engineering, ergonomics, informatics, and systems analysis. The goal of human factor science is to understand the way we think, problem solve, we work with tools in our environment, and we look at information and the way we interact in organizations and with others. In human factors, we consider that there are error modes. There's actually categories of the way that people make errors. The first one is automatic mode, and that's what we're going to focus on today. But you need to understand that there's an automatic side and a non-automatic side. On the non-automatic side, you'll be aware of what you're doing, and you're thinking about it. In automatic mode, you are not. Automatic mode errors actually occur in any stage of cognition or any stage of thinking. It can occur in the planning stage, the storage stage, or the execution of a task. In an automatic mode error, usually in the execution stage, there's a failure of an action to go as intended. And this is what we think applies to tubing misconnections. These occur in common and familiar functions in a familiar surrounding where you're used to doing something effortlessly and rapidly. Your thinking is under what we call attentional control. In other words, we're only paying attention when there's a big change. Otherwise, we're just going about our daily business. You need to understand especially, though, that these are errors that are unintentional and may not be recognized by the participant. In fact, that's one of the most important features of an automatic mode error, is that we're not able to recognize it at the time. We're in this automatic functioning mode. In healthcare, we consider one of the most important human factors issues to consider is these automatic mode errors, where they're made without the participant's knowledge. An example of that would be a slip. A slip would be something like locking the keys in the car in your usual life, and most of us have had that experience of locking the keys in the car or locking ourselves out of our office or out of our home. The other thing we might see ourselves doing is dialing the wrong number. Now, this is a phone number that you usually know, you do it all the time, it's very familiar to you, but for some reason, right in the sequence of dialing numbers, you hit the wrong key. The other thing that I've found myself do is something like putting the milk in the cabinet and the cereal in the refrigerator. Again, these are very familiar tasks that you're used to doing, but for some particular reason at that time, you don't do it correctly. So we can think about slips in our ordinary life, like locking our keys in their car, but what are slips in healthcare? Well, we actually do have some examples of those and things that we've done to mitigate the risk of a slip in healthcare. One example of that is free-flow intravenous tubing. In healthcare, we used to have tubing that it was easy for an accident to happen where you'd take the roller clamp, not be able to close it completely, and an entire bag of intravenous fluid would go into the patient. We've changed that design now and we don't have that problem any longer. The other example is needle-less systems. We've taken the needle out of many systems because we're afraid we'd get a needle stick. And in fact, we've changed the containers that we put needles in anticipation that somebody might not be watching and then accidentally put their hand over the container and stick themselves with a needle. We've also instituted double checks on many medications and different procedures because we know that accidents do happen. And the other example that you see there is a line that is used for the gas that drives a non-invasive blood pressure cuff. That's at the top. The bottom is an intravenous line. What we haven't changed is the connectors between those two. So today it's possible to accidentally connect those two. And those are the things that we're trying to change now with standards in the industry and by increasing awareness. The other thing we think happens when these errors occur is what we call inattentive blindness. And that is you look at something but you don't see it. And this occurs when something's very familiar in the color, the shape, and the type. So your brain does what we call similarity matching. And you pick up something you don't mean to pick up because your brain tells you it's what you're used to picking up. And you can see that sometimes in drawers where you store intravenous fluids. All of those are in opaque bags. The similar shape and font of the bag makes your brain think you're picking up one when you really mean to do the other. We've also found in the environment that distractions play a big part in these errors. And there's been several studies, this one by Santel, Hicks, and Meekin and Cousins out of the United States Pharmacopoeia, where they looked at medication error reports and found that distractions and workload were cited very often as contributing factors to errors. The United States Pharmacopoeia found that physical environments that promote safe medication use were so important that they proposed a new general chapter that would set a standard for optimal physical environment guidelines to promote accurate medication use and improve performance. Among those would be things like lighting, sound, and the physical ergonomic environment that can contribute to safer medication administration. So is color coding an answer to this? Probably not. The science actually says that color must be very significant in its difference from the rest of everything in the environment in order to even see it. And in fact, most people can only easily discriminate between 5 and 6 colors. Color has a problem too with lighting. In low light conditions, many people cannot perceive color as different. And in fact, what we also find is that there are non-stereotypical meanings to some colors. So that when you think red, you may think stop or you may think hot. And yellow may mean caution for you, may mean that you should go in another culture. And blue often is associated with cold in the United States, but blue may be some other meaning for someone else. So color coding is really not the answer to this. The Institute for Safe Medication Practices identified in one of their alerts that there really is no standard for color in healthcare, especially not for enteral feeding equipment or for PICC lines. In this particular alert, they identified that there was an error that was made when an oral medication was given instead of down a PEG tube, it was given in an IV line, and they thought that had to do with a confusion between the colors of those lines. So it's important for us to understand that color is not an adequate defense mechanism against tubing misconnections. Now what I'd like to do is share with you a set of 3 stories about tubing misconnections so we can look at how these occurred. The first is an inadvertent tubing misconnection where a feeding was in a syringe. It was intended for enteral administration, but it was connected to a PICC line instead. And this is what the environment looks like where that happened. As you can see, there's several different tubing systems in place here. There's a central venous catheter, an epidural catheter, a gastrostomy tube, and an arterial catheter. And if you notice at the end of each one of those pointers, the connective piece there is a Luer lock, or a universal connector. So we've got 4 different systems here that are not compatible to each other. However, it's possible we could make the mistake of connecting them. And in this particular case, the IV tubing and the PICC line tubing were universally connecting to a syringe. And so you can see it was very easy for those to switch back and forth. It was a low light environment. We also found that it was an automatic mode error. This was a person who was connecting and reconnecting these several times in a shift. In fact, the feedings were happening every 3 hours and the infusions in between. So you can see how this is a familiar task where an automatic mode error is possible. There were many distractions and interruptions in the environment. The physical environment was dark, and the physical design of the connectors was compatible. In the physical environment also we found that there were families present, which we know is a good thing for the patient, but can also serve as a distractor for the clinician. And it was a minimal stimulation environment. A darkened environment, it was quiet, and there were swaddled infants. And even though we didn't mean for it to be a distraction, we had given radio frequency phones to the staff so each nurse could have ease of communication. However, we know now that that also provides a distraction when the phone is ringing. So we've got these significant issues: automatic mode error, distractions, interruptions, a physical environment that contributes, and also the physical design of the connectors. All of those came together for this event. This is an example from the FDA of the recent calendar that they have, where they've given many examples of different tubing connections. And as you can see, again, we've got connectors that are compatible.